Good evening. Welcome to Light Code Portal. I'm Tanya Griffin, Dean of Education with Light Language University, and I'm here with Anna Noyce, founder of Light Language University and Circle Insights. Tonight, our topic of a conversation is going to be the death experience. So we're very excited to talk about this. Um, Ms. Anna, how are you doing tonight?
Wonderful. And I'm excited to have this conversation. This is one that a lot of people are afraid of, and one that happens that we should all have this conversation. So, yes, I'm looking forward to the
Exactly.
questions.
Okay, so our first question is and the question is, what is death? What happens when somebody's body starts working? What is the process spiritually with that?
When it stops working,
Yes, when the body stops working.
what is death? What death is really just a transition. We're spirit beings having a physical experience in the 3D world. And so what's happening is when the body is finally time to let go, we merge out of the physical body and go back into what we really are. So if you think of that, we have 30% of ourselves, of our original selves, of the spirit um, part of us, is in the physical body, running through the chakras and all the energy centers. And the aura is really the 70% of us. We're these huge beings that are cramming ourselves into these little tiny bodies to have these experience, this small experience, which is a blink in eons of lifetimes that we have all over. Um, and we're having this experience, and when it's time, we emerge out of the physical bodies and we come back into the whole unit and then merge into different frequencies that are on these other dimensions that are around us. And we're always participating in them because we're multidimensional. So our thoughts,
Right.
our feelings, our dreams are all a part of that fourth, fifth, and other dimensions that are connected. So we're always connected. We just leave the shell. Kind of like trading in your car.
Right. Right.
And so, yeah.
So during this transition process, is there any physical pain other than, maybe what your death was caused by?
Right, right. Well, and so it's a little bit different for everybody, and it kind of depends on what the person um, so we know that there's soul contracts, and we also know that there's soul agreements. And some of the soul contracts people do in their soul contracts, believe it or not, want to have that experience of what it's like to feel and have that however they transition. And sometimes it's a soul agreement. You may make that and decide unconsciously on a higher level that that's something you want to experience. But oftentimes, what I understand in working with guides and doing my own astral projections is that if it is something that's going to be too painful, spirit will pull you out of your body. So for instance, people who are on the plane crashes, a lot of times they're already leaving before the plane hits the ground and all of the things happen.
Right.
And for some who are, you know, then this depends on that contract.
Okay.
Mhm.
That makes sense. All right. So after this transition happens, what's next? What comes next?
Well, so this wonderful thing is that we have these beings. Oh, honey, I'm sorry, we have some kind of noise. We're getting some kind of some loud noise. Okay.
I hear that, and I
Um,
don't know where it's from.
I don't know. Uh, so what happens next? We do have our guides and beings that are there and loved ones, and sometimes if it is a very traumatic, we don't see them because remember, everything is on frequency, and if we don't match that frequency, or if we're not able to, if we block ourselves because we're too obsessed with something that we want to keep here in the third dimension and we're afraid to let go, we may not see the other beings that are there to welcome us and help us move through. And if it's something tragic, then we go into these other frequencies where it's kind of like a hospital or a place where they help review and work with us. So it can be different for each person depending on how they exit or what happens in those last moments.
Right. And that's, oftentimes I think that's where people might get the term stuck, where you get the ghost and the spirits and that sort of thing, because they're often still very connected to certain things in this experience.
Attached, yes.
Correct. Yes.
Which is so fun. Yeah, so funny because we do have a lot of people that still want to be in 3D. To be spirit and to be free is magnificent. We just forget. Um, because on that level, we just think of something and immediately we have it or we create it. And what's interesting, and Tanya, the reason some people get stuck is because that middle um, part or middle dimension that's in between looks a lot like this world. So people, I've seen and heard people who didn't really know they were dead. They didn't see it because they're still going through their lives thinking that it's happening because it's so real to them.
Right.
And so, yeah. And remember, this is just another dimension that we're on 3D, but the next dimension is just as real as our vibration fits that frequency as as those next layers that we go into. Some of our dreams, when you're having them, are so vivid
Right.
you really believe they're happening.
So when we get to the other side, where do we go? What happens?
Well, there's several different places you can go. One of the places that you can go is we're having sorry. Uh, so on the other side, when you get to the other side, there are different places you can go. It depends on where the spirit guides take you. They can take you into, like I said, a hospital, which is kind of like where we are to help work through some traumas. Sometimes we sleep. Sometimes it's such a traumatic experience that we need to sleep, and that could be decades in our time, or for a while. Um, and then other times we're awake, and we come right back into the physical, onto this plane in another physical body, and interact with everything. So it just kind of depends. There's also, you can go in the Akashic records, or you can match a frequency that's a higher plane. Um, People ask, and I've had a lot of people ask, does hell really exist? And yes, it does, on a different dimension. So one of the things, like our teachers, like Gandhi, is one of the things that he did is he wanted to laugh. His last breath was to be laughing, because in that laugh, it raises your frequency and puts you on a higher frequency and a higher plane. If you're sad or upset, it can get you stuck in the middle world where you can't see your beings, the beings that are there, your spirit team, or it can drop you into something. If you believe you're going into, I would say, hell, then you would have that experience. What pulls you out is really about how you change your thoughts and how you shift your perspective.
Okay. That actually plays into our next question is, will I go to heaven?
If you believe you're going to go to heaven, you will go to heaven. The heaven that you create may be different from somebody else's, but whatever you can create. Because remember that we're all the dimensions. There's so many, and there are eons of them. So whatever that your frequency when you pass will match that frequency and move on to that.
So, what about the question of life after death?
Is there life after death? Well, okay, so that's kind of a two-part question. Yes, and yes. Actually, that's two yeses. So, yes, there is life after death if you define it by going through the death process and wanting to come back into this 3D. But there's also life after death if you're a part of the frequencies, because that's who we are. So what do you define life as? Do you define it as what we're experiencing in the 3D world, or do you define it when we're on those other levels?
Right. Okay. What about people who commit suicide?
And so, oh yes, and so to answer that question, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
No.
yes, um, so some people, if they believe when they commit suicide that they're going to go to a certain place, they will create that. Because really, spirit, again, it's all about frequency when you go past the 3D. And we got to go back, and I want to bring this up again, but we want to go back that the levels of consciousness is what puts together the 3D world that we know. It is how we as a collective, we've got the individual group and then the collective mind that actually this experience that we have.
Okay. So our next question is, who will be there to help me cross over?
Okay. And that's, yes. So family members who've passed on, spirit teams that are there, which are consistent of our spirit guides, spirit animals, beings that have come to help us, teachers. It can be ancestors that have come in, or somebody that's a friend that we've met in another lifetime that wants to come in and help us. So it can be, and angels, of course. But there's a whole team.
Okay. So would I be able to communicate with my family and loved ones? Would I be able to go see them after I die?
Yes. Yes. So it depends again on how tragic and how that person, if they let go of this 3D and move into fully spirit, they will have the ability to come through the dreams. They will have the ability to communicate. If that person's able to hear or see, they'll be able to communicate that way, like a medium. And you're a medium, so you understand how to hear and feel spirits and connect with them. And yes, they will have that. I was actually walking through my living room this weekend, and I heard, Anna, help. And it was kind of interesting because I'm just walking by and I went, oh, did I hear that? And then I had to stop and think, I did hear that. It sounded like, so I called someone and I said, is that you? And they said, no, it's not. And I went, oh, okay. It was the spirit. So I have to go back and work with this person. But yes. And we are, again, remember, we're 70% spirit. So we're also playing in these realms, whether we're conscious of it or not. We are constantly, it's bleeding through to this lifetime, and we're bleeding through to that, whatever dimensions that they're on. So yeah, they can.
Okay. When I die, will I feel sadness or loss for my friends and family, the family that I leave behind?
Yes and no. So how does that work? Yes and no. Because when you leave, the emotions go with you, and there's a life review. And when you have that life review, you will feel all the emotions that are happening. And in that moment when you finish, and I kind of like to think it's like and I've had this experience, it's like flying in an airplane and the airplane kind of drops. I don't know if you've had that experience. It's kind of dropped because of an air pocket and your life flashes before your eyes. It's amazing how much information can go by in a few seconds. So it's like that, you get this flash, but you get all the emotions. So you have the choice to hold on to it. And if you do, that's what gets you stuck. Or you have the choice to recognize that it's time to move on, but you still have the connection to this 3D world. It's just a different connection. And Tanya, I wanted to say that one thing, when we're grieving on this side, what we're missing is the physical presence. And I know it's kind of a duh question, but we're missing that physical presence in the 3D world. But we still have the spirit presence. And so that part of us can always communicate with that 70% out here. So think of it, 30% is having the physical experience. The other 70 of us is still communicating and still part of the spiritual realm.
Right.
So that's what we at the university talk about as light language. It's that nonverbal and yet verbal and yet vibration of all of it connected as it's moving through the physical and outside in the whole etheric level.
Right. So when we transition and we cross over, will we remember all the lives we've lived before at that point?
Yes and no. I'm never going to give you a straight answer, it sounds like, right? Just one answer. Yes, if you are at that point and you want to have that memory, again, it's the drop of ocean, it's the drop of water in the ocean. So at that point, you can still be the drop of water and just remember a little bit, or you can expand your awareness or your consciousness and all of that. So you have access to all of it if that's where you want to go. So, yes, but no if you don't want to or if it doesn't come to you.
Right.
So how many times have we thought, and there's that old commercial, I could have had a V8, right? Why didn't I think of that? So it just depends where you are in that moment.
Okay. So, how does death in this dimension affect ourselves in other dimensions?
Well, it ripples through. It ripples through. So this, as death in this dimension, and as we start to leave the body, we start to expand, and that goes back into the monad. So the monad is that one part of us that's always spirit, that goes down into the 12 pieces that is our higher self, that breaks down into 144, because everything's 12. So it's 1, 12, and then 144. And so once we roll back up into the higher self and go back into spirit, and we're there with the anatomy, it does kind of do a ripple effect around it. It affects us. So it's either emotionally, physically, or the awareness that is brought back by that consciousness also will affect everything else. So you go back to that question of the drop of water we just talked about and the ocean, and let's say that you want to remember the ocean, then that ripples through the whole monad and it can affect.
So, say, and using the monad for an example, good gracious, and we know that time is not linear.
Right.
So, then my death in this particular dimension could affect a life that I had in the past that I'm living concurrently now.
Exactly. It ripples back and forward.
Right.
And the 144 is past, present, future, and parallel lives all happening at once.
Right.
Which is what I'm so excited about quantum physics, because they're now starting to say, oh, we figured it out. We're doing the slit experiment. We're doing all these other experiments where they're understanding that it's not just one thing, which we thought it was just one focal, but now it's the whole room.
Right.
So yes,
So, is death forever?
depending how you look at it. So when you look at death as just an experience, I mean, it was yesterday forever. It was just an experience. So if you look at death kind of like it was yesterday, but you have today and you have the future and you had yesterday. So if you look at it from that perspective, no, it's not. But if you look at you only had yesterday and that was the only thing that mattered was yesterday, and you're constantly thinking that, then that could be forever. But again, do you see where I'm going? It's a
Hmm.
shift of consciousness in how you see the broader perspective.
Right. So, when we do crossover, do we go to a life review? Is that something that is normal?
Yes, it is very normal. And the reason we go through a life review is not for punishment or to show us what we're bad or to show us, it's just to show us how we live that life. And whether we judge it or not is our perspective. But you also have to understand the beings that are with you are not judging you, no matter how we judge it from this perspective in the 3D. It's just an experience. And often we have to remember too that we had a contract pre-birth to have certain experiences, whether we're the protagonist or the antagonist, to play out or create these experiences among our, soul groups that are around us.
Right. So, when I see my loved ones, once I cross over and I see my loved ones again, will they be the same age they were when they died? Will they look different?
I like that experience. That's a good question. So, one of the things to know that if you do see your loved one and they look the same, it could be because as spirit beings, we can we can actually show you, we can change the frequency of that etheric body. And yes, they could show themselves the same age. They could show themselves younger. If they show themselves the same time and they're in a lot of pain and they continue to be in a lot of pain, chances are you're not where you're supposed to be. You're in that middle world and you're caught. So you need to shift perspectives and move out of there, or, because they can't change. And if they're still reliving that loop, and we call that a loop, then that's not good. But yes, spirit beings, as we as spirit, can change.
Okay. What if we don't fulfill our soul contracts during this lifetime?
Well, we get to do it again. we get to try to do it again. And also, contracts are a little bit, they're not black and white. What's interesting is we're also bringing in these past lives that are bleeding through. We're opening up life lessons, and we're also collapsing timelines as we're working out through our karma. So some of the karma is also coming through those contracts that we're wanting to experience.
So if we don't resolve that karma, then we've got to continue to work on that problem.
But I do want to put this out there as it's not we got to. The truth is it's really an opportunity. Because if you exist for eons, then it's just something to try. So it's like having a banquet in front of you and trying different flavors and seeing what that tastes like and what that tastes like. And you don't like that, but you might like this. So that's kind of how we look at it from the soul and spirit perspective. From the human perspective, we've decided what's good, what's bad, and what we don't want to do, and what we do want to do, and it's black and white. From the spirit perspective, it's like, well, what's this? What is this? And what if I do this? How does that work? But then we do have those contracts and agreements that also kind of are interwoven in between all of that.
Very interesting. Well, that was our last question. So I think that we answered that. I think that, you pointed out that's not really something to be frightened of. It's just another experience that we go through. And it's just a transition.
Exactly. Into something amazing, which we already are. We just forgot.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Miss Anna, for being here tonight.
Thank you.
And I want to point out real quick that we do have some upcoming classes or workshops with Light Language University. This weekend, August 7th and 8th, we're doing a Light Language 102 workshop. We also have a medical intuitive workshop coming up August 21st and 22nd. And then we also have our class called New to This, which is a different class each time. It's a 2-hour class. It's done via Zoom. We have one on August the 11th and one on the 25th. And each class is tailored to the people that show up. So that way you can ask the questions that you need to know for your journey. Correct?
Yes, yes.
So the last word tonight, I want to say our next Light Code portal will be on August the 18th, and it will be concerning soul contracts and soul agreements, which we touched on tonight.
Wonderful, yes.
All right. So thank you so much, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
We're looking forward to it. Thank you.
All right.